The bustling streets of Mumbai were a world unto themselves, a chaotic symphony of honking horns, street vendors calling out their wares, and the constant hum of life moving at a frenetic pace. Among the countless faces that blended into the vibrant tapestry of the city was Rocky, a man whose presence commanded attention. He was not the tallest or the most muscular, but there was an undeniable intensity in his eyes, a fire that seemed always on the verge of erupting. Rocky had always been a fighter. Growing up in the crowded lanes of the city, he'd learned early on that the only way to survive was to fight for what was his. And fight he did. From schoolyard brawls to street skirmishes, Rocky had built a reputation as someone you didn't want to cross. His fists were his voice, and he spoke with them often, much to the dismay of his weary parents, but beneath the surface of his rough exterior lay a heart that was fiercely loyal and, when it came to Neha, incredibly tender. Neha was everything Rocky was not: calm, composed, and gentle. She had a way of soothing his fiery temper with just a word or a smile. Where others saw a volatile, unpredictable man, she saw the boy he'd once been, the one who had to fight for everything he had. In her presence, the storm within him would calm, if only for a moment. Their relationship was as intense as Rocky's temper. They had met by chance, a fleeting encounter at a local cafe where Rocky had gone to cool off after yet another fight. Neha had been sitting at a corner table, engrossed in a book, oblivious to the world around her. Something about her serenity had drawn Rocky in, like a moth to a flame. He'd approached her with his usual bravado, but she'd disarmed him with her kindness. From that moment on, Rocky was captivated. In Neha, Rocky found a sanctuary, a place where his anger couldn't reach. She was the calm to his storm, the peace to his chaos. But even she couldn't completely tame the fire within him. Rocky's temper was always there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite it. And the streets of Mumbai provided plenty of sparks. Despite Neha's efforts to keep him grounded, Rocky continued to find himself in fights. Some were over trivial matters, others more serious, but all left a mark on him, and on their relationship. Neha worried constantly, fearing that one day his temper would lead him into a fight he couldn't win. She loved him deeply, but she knew that love alone might not be enough to save him from himself. As the days passed, the tension in Rocky's life grew. The city that had once been his playground was becoming a battlefield, and he was losing the fight to control his anger. Each confrontation chipped away at the man Neha loved, leaving behind someone more hardened, more distant. The Rocky she knew was slipping away, replaced by a version of him she barely recognized. But even as he spiraled deeper into his rage, one thing remained constant: his love for Neha. She was the last tether holding him to the man he wanted to be, the one person who could still reach him through the storm. And so, he fought to hold on to her, to the life they had built together, even as the world around him threatened to tear it apart. Little did Rocky know that the greatest fight of his life was yet to come, a fight that would test the limits of his love, his strength, and his very soul. And when it came, it would be a battle not just for survival, but for the man he would become. The sun had barely risen over the skyline of Mumbai, casting a warm, golden hue over the city, but the day had already begun for Rocky. His mornings were routine, yet always carried an undercurrent of tension. As he stood by the small sink in his cramped apartment, splashing water on his face, he could feel the familiar edge creeping into his thoughts. It was always there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be provoked. The kitchen was a hive of activity as Rocky's mother, a small, wiry woman with silver-streaked hair, moved about preparing breakfast. The smell of freshly brewed chai filled the air, mingling with the scent of frying parathas. His father, a stern man with deep lines etched into his face from years of hard work, sat at the table, reading the morning newspaper, his brow furrowed in concentration. Rocky entered the kitchen, his heavy footsteps announcing his arrival. His mother looked up, offering a tired but affectionate smile. "Rocky, come eat before you head out," she said, placing a plate of parathas on the table. "You can't start the day on an empty stomach." Rocky grunted in response, his mind already elsewhere. He sat down, but barely touched the food, his thoughts racing. The tension in his jaw was evident, and his father noticed it immediately. "What's bothering you now, Rocky?" his father asked, not looking up from the newspaper. "Nothing," Rocky replied curtly, shoving a piece of paratha into his mouth. But the truth was, everything bothered him. The noise, the crowds, the constant pressure to keep his temper in check, it all weighed on him, making him feel like a ticking time bomb. His father sighed, folding the newspaper and setting it aside. "You need to learn to control that temper of yours. It's going to get you into trouble one day, and then what? You'll drag us all down with you." Rocky's grip tightened on the cup of chai he was holding. "I said it's nothing," he repeated, his voice low but laced with frustration. His mother shot a warning glance at his father, trying to defuse the situation. "Rocky, why don't you take the day off? Spend some time with Neha. She always knows how to calm you down." Neha. Just the mention of her name softened Rocky's expression. She was his anchor, the one person who could pull him back from the edge when everything else seemed to be pushing him towards it. He had met her a little over a year ago, and from the moment their paths crossed, his life had changed in ways he never thought possible. Rocky stood up from the table, pushing his chair back with more force than necessary. "I'll see you later," he muttered, grabbing his jacket and heading for the door. His mother called after him, "Remember what I said, Rocky. Spend time with Neha. It'll do you good." But Rocky was already out the door, his mind racing with thoughts of the day ahead. The streets of Mumbai greeted him with their usual chaos, cars honking, vendors shouting, people jostling for space on the crowded sidewalks. For most, it was just another day in the city, but for Rocky, it was another test of his patience that he navigated the familiar routes, his eyes sharp, his senses heightened. It was a constant battle to keep his temper in check, but he knew he had to, for Neha's sake. If not his own. It wasn't long before he reached the small, cozy cafe where he and Neha often met. As he pushed open the door, the noise of the city faded, replaced by the soft murmur of conversation and the clinking of cups. And there she was, sitting at their usual table by the window, her face lighting up as soon as she saw him. Neha was a vision of calm amidst the chaos of Rocky's world. Dressed in a simple salwar kameez, her long, dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders, she exuded a warmth that seemed to melt away his anger the moment he saw her. She stood up to greet him, and for a moment, the tension in his body eased. "Rocky," she said softly, her voice like a balm to his frayed nerves. I was just about to order. How's your day been? Rocky forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. It's been, all right, he replied, taking a seat across from her. Better now that I'm here. Neha reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. You've been stressed lately. I can see it in your eyes. You need to find a way to let go, Rocky. You can't keep carrying all this anger inside you. Rocky looked down at their joined hands, her touch so gentle, so different from the harshness he was used to. I know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But it's not easy, Neha. Everywhere I go, there's something that sets me off. I try, but, Neha squeezed his hand reassuringly. We'll get through this together. You don't have to face it alone. And you know I'm always here for you. Rocky nodded, grateful for her support, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was looming on the horizon, something that even Neha's love might not be able to protect him from. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, and for a while, Rocky allowed himself to relax, to bask in the warmth of Neha's presence. But as they finished their tea and stepped out into the bustling streets once more, the weight of the world settled back onto his shoulders, heavier than before. As they walked hand in hand through the crowded market, Rocky's eyes darted around, always alert, always on guard. Neha noticed the change in his demeanor and gently pulled him closer, hoping to ease his tension, but Rocky's mind was elsewhere, already anticipating the next confrontation, the next challenge to his fragile control. And as they turned a corner, a group of young men standing outside a shop caught his attention. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, was staring at Neha in a way that made Rocky's blood boil. Without a second thought, Rocky let go of Neha's hand and marched over to the group, his fists clenched at his sides. Neha called after him, her voice filled with concern, but it was too late. Rocky's temper had already flared. What do you think you're looking at? Rocky demanded, his voice low and threatening. The young man smirked, clearly unfazed. Just admiring the view, he replied, his tone mocking. That was all it took. Rocky's fist shot out, connecting with the man's jaw in a blur of movement. The other men immediately jumped in, and within seconds, a full-blown fight had erupted. Neha watched in horror, trying to pull Rocky away, but he was lost in the heat of the moment, his anger consuming him. By the time the police arrived, Rocky was bruised and bleeding, but the other men had fared worse. Neha managed to talk the officers down, assuring them that she would take Rocky home and keep him out of trouble. Reluctantly, they let him go, warning him that next time, he wouldn't be so lucky. As they walked away, Neha's heart ached for the man beside her. She knew he wasn't a bad person, he just didn't know how to control the rage that simmered inside him. But she also knew that if he didn't learn to rein it in, it would destroy him. And the thought of losing Rocky, of watching him spiral out of control, terrified her more than anything else. That night, as they sat together on the rooftop of Rocky's apartment building, looking out over the city, Neha leaned her head on his shoulder, hoping to provide him with some comfort, even if only for a little while. You need to find peace, Rocky, she whispered, her voice heavy with emotion. Before it's too late. Rocky didn't respond, but he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. He knew she was right, but he also knew that finding peace wasn't going to be easy. The city was full of challenges, full of people who would push him to his limits. And as long as he lived in this world, he would have to fight to keep his temper in check, but for now, with Neha by his side, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to control the fire within him, before it consumed everything he held dear. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the narrow alleyways of Mumbai, where the city's pulse seemed to quicken with every passing minute. The usual cacophony of the streets, the vendors' shouts, the blaring horns, the chatter of passers-by, was muffled in Rocky's ears as he moved through the maze of streets with a purpose. His mind was a whirlwind, his thoughts consumed by the anger that had been simmering all morning. It wasn't long before he found himself in one of the city's less reputable districts, a place where people knew to keep their heads down and mind their own business. Rocky's presence here was not unusual, it was where he often found trouble, or rather, where trouble often found him. And today, trouble had a name. Anthony. Anthony was a name that carried weight in these parts. A man with a reputation for violence and a network of cronies who enforced his will with ruthless efficiency. He was the kind of man who thrived in the shadows, feeding off the fear he instilled in others. And today, fate had decided that Rocky and Anthony would cross paths. Rocky had heard whispers about Anthony before, stories of his cruelty and the hold he had over the area. But stories didn't scare Rocky, nothing did, really. His temper made sure of that. He walked into the lion's den without a second thought, his fists already itching for a fight. That he found Anthony in the back room of a dingy bar, surrounded by his usual entourage. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, smoke, and cheap alcohol. Anthony sat at a table, leaning back in his chair with a cocky grin on his face, as if he had all the time in the world. His eyes narrowed when he saw Rocky, but he didn't seem surprised. "So, you're the famous Rocky I've been hearing about," Anthony said, his voice dripping with mockery. He didn't bother to stand up, a clear sign that he didn't see Rocky as a threat. "And you must be Anthony," Rocky replied, his tone icy. "I've heard a lot about you." Anthony chuckled, the sound grating on Rocky's nerves. "All good things, I hope." "Not really," Rocky said, his fists clenching at his sides. He could feel his temper rising, the familiar heat spreading through his chest. "I'm here to settle a score." Anthony's grin widened, but there was no humor in it. "Is that so? And what makes you think you can do that?" Rocky took a step forward, his eyes locked on Anthony's. "I don't think. I know." The room fell silent as the tension between the two men thickened. The air was charged, electric, like the moments before a storm. Rocky could feel the eyes of Anthony's men on him, could sense their anticipation. They were waiting, watching to see what would happen next. Anthony finally stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He was taller than Rocky by a few inches, with a build that suggested he was no stranger to physical confrontations. But Rocky wasn't intimidated. He had faced bigger men before and come out on top. "Let's see what you've got, then," Anthony said, his voice low and menacing. He cracked his knuckles, a wicked gleam in his eyes that was all the invitation Rocky needed. He lunged at Anthony, his fist connecting with Anthony's jaw in a powerful blow that sent the other man staggering backward. The room erupted into chaos as Anthony's men surged forward, but Rocky was a whirlwind of fists and fury, taking them down one by one. The fight was brutal, a raw display of strength and skill. Rocky was relentless, his anger fueling every punch, every kick. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, could hear the blood pounding in his ears. Anthony fought back with equal ferocity, but Rocky was faster, more determined. Blow after blow, Rocky and Anthony exchanged hits, neither willing to back down. The walls of the small room seemed to close in around them, the air thick with the sounds of grunts, the dull thuds of fists meeting flesh, and the occasional crash as a piece of furniture was upended. But Rocky had the upper hand. His anger, so often a liability, was now his greatest weapon. It gave him a strength that Anthony couldn't match, a fire that burned hotter with each passing second. With a final, bone-crunching punch, Rocky sent Anthony crashing to the floor. Anthony lay there, dazed, blood dripping from a split lip and a cut above his eye. Rocky stood over him, breathing hard, his knuckles bruised and bloodied. "You picked the wrong fight, Anthony," Rocky said, his voice cold and unwavering. "Remember that." For a moment, the room was silent, the only sound the heavy breathing of the two men. Anthony's men, now subdued and nursing their own injuries, watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. Rocky turned to leave, but as he did, Anthony's voice, weak but filled with venom, reached his ears. "This isn't over, Rocky," Anthony spat, wiping the blood from his mouth. "I'll make you pay for this. You and everyone you care about." Rocky paused, his back to Anthony. He knew a threat when he heard one, and he knew Anthony wasn't the kind of man to make empty promises. But in that moment, Rocky didn't care. His temper had gotten the better of him once again, and now, all he wanted was to get out of there before he did something even more reckless. Without another word, Rocky walked out of the bar, leaving Anthony to nurse his wounds and plot his revenge. As he stepped back into the harsh light of day, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving Rocky feeling drained, but not victorious. He had won the fight, but Anthony's parting words lingered in his mind, a dark cloud over what should have been a triumph. He knew he had made an enemy that day, one who would stop at nothing to get back at him. But the consequences of his actions were not something he could think about now. All he could do was try to push the thoughts aside and focus on what came next. But even as he walked away, Rocky couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was looming on the horizon, something that would force him to confront the darkest parts of himself. And when that moment came, he would need more than just his fists to survive. The days after the fight passed in a tense, uneasy silence. Rocky tried to put the encounter with Anthony out of his mind, but the threat lingered like a shadow, haunting his every step. He knew Anthony would seek revenge, but he had no idea how or when. His every instinct told him to stay alert, but nothing could have prepared him for what was to come. It was a sweltering afternoon when Rocky last saw Neha. They had planned to meet at their usual spot, a quiet park on the outskirts of the city where they could steal moments of peace away from the chaos of Mumbai. Neha was waiting for him under the shade of a large banyan tree, her face lighting up when she saw him approach. As Rocky walked toward her, he felt a rare sense of calm. Neha had that effect on him, soothing the fires that constantly burned within him. She was his refuge, his anchor in a world that often felt like it was spinning out of control. They spent the afternoon talking and laughing, enjoying each other's company. Rocky cherished these moments, when the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them. Neha teased him about his temper, urging him to try and keep it in check. "Not everything has to be a fight, Rocky," she said, her voice soft and full of concern. "You need to learn to walk away sometimes." Rocky smiled at her words, but deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. Walking away had never been in his nature, and it was a hard habit to break. But for Neha, he promised to try. The sun began to dip below the horizon. They said their goodbyes, neither of them wanting to part, but knowing they had to. Rocky watched her walk away, her figure growing smaller in the distance until she was just a dot on the horizon. He felt a pang of sadness, as he always did when they were apart, but he consoled himself with the thought that they would see each other again soon. But that moment never came. The night was warm, the city alive with its usual hustle and bustle. Rocky was at home, trying to relax, but his mind kept wandering back to Neha. He decided to give her a call, just to hear her voice before he went to bed. But when he dialed her number, there was no answer. Frowning, Rocky tried again. Still nothing. A sense of unease settled in his chest. It wasn't like Neha to ignore his calls. He called her again and again, each time growing more anxious. Finally, on the fifth attempt, someone picked up. But it wasn't Neha. A low, sinister chuckle filled the line, sending a chill down Rocky's spine. He recognized that laugh immediately. It was Anthony, looking for Neha. Anthony's voice oozed malice, each word dripping with the promise of something terrible. "Where is she?" Rocky demanded, his heart pounding in his chest. Panic was clawing its way up his throat, but he forced it down. He couldn't afford to lose control now, not when Neha's safety was on the line. "She's with me," Anthony replied, his tone casual as if they were discussing something trivial. "Let's just say she's keeping me company." Rocky's blood ran cold. The images that flashed through his mind made his stomach turn. He could barely breathe, his hands shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "If you touch her," Rocky began, but Anthony cut him off with another laugh. "Oh, Rocky," Anthony said, his voice full of mock pity. "You're not in a position to make threats. You see, this is what happens when you cross me. You take something from me, I take something from you. It's only fair." "Please," Rocky's voice was a hoarse whisper, the desperation clear. "Let her go. She has nothing to do with this." "Too late for that," Anthony replied, his voice hardening. "But don't worry, I'll make sure she knows that this is all because of you. I'll make sure she knows it was your temper that got her into this mess." Rocky's heart shattered. He knew Anthony wasn't bluffing, the man was a monster, capable of anything. The helplessness he felt was like a knife in his chest, twisting deeper with each passing second. He had always prided himself on being able to protect the ones he loved, but now, in this moment, he was powerless. Anthony's next words were delivered with chilling finality. "Goodbye, Rocky. Enjoy the silence." The line went dead. Rocky stood there, the phone still pressed to his ear, as the realization of what had just happened crashed over him like a tidal wave. He felt his knees buckle, and he collapsed onto the floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had never felt so powerless, so completely at the mercy of someone else. Hours passed in a blur. Rocky tried to call Neha's number again and again, but there was no answer. He even tried calling Anthony, but it was no use. He was met with nothing but silence. Desperate, he went to the police, but their response was frustratingly slow. They asked questions, took down details, but Rocky could see in their eyes that they didn't understand the urgency. They didn't know Anthony like he did. Time was slipping away, and with each passing minute, the chances of finding Neha grew slimmer. Days turned into a nightmare as Rocky searched for Neha, going to every place he could think of, questioning anyone who might have seen her. But there was no sign of her, no clue as to where Anthony had taken her, and then, after what felt like an eternity, the call came. Rocky was at home, staring blankly at the wall when his phone rang. The number was unknown, but he answered it immediately, hope and dread battling for dominance in his chest. Rocky, the voice on the other end was not Anthony's. It was a cold, clinical voice, one that sent a shiver down Rocky's spine. "We found her." Rocky's heart skipped a beat. "Is she?" He couldn't bring himself to finish the question. "She's gone," the voice said flatly. "We found her body near the docks." "I'm sorry." The phone slipped from Rocky's hand, hitting the floor with a dull thud. His world crumbled around him, the weight of the news crushing him into the ground. Neha was gone. The love of his life, the one person who had seen the good in him despite his flaws, had been taken from him in the cruelest way possible. Rocky's grief quickly morphed into a burning rage. He wanted to scream, to destroy everything in his path, but all he could do was fall to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He had failed her. His temper had brought this upon her, and now she was gone. Anthony had won. He had taken everything from Rocky, leaving him with nothing but pain and anger. And in that moment, Rocky knew that nothing would ever be the same again. He had lost the most important person in his life, and with her, he had lost a part of himself. All that remained was the anger, festering and growing, threatening to consume him completely. As Rocky knelt there, broken and beaten, one thought burned brighter than all the others: Anthony would pay for what he had done. No matter the cost, no matter what it took, Rocky would make sure of it. The world around Rocky seemed to have lost all color. The once vibrant city of Mumbai felt like a ghost town, its bustling streets and lively markets now just a blur in the background of his grief. Rocky was no longer the man he used to be. Neha's death had shattered him in ways he couldn't have imagined, leaving behind a shell of the person who had once been so full of life and fire. For days, Rocky wandered the streets aimlessly, his mind numb with pain. He replayed the moments leading up to Neha's abduction over and over again in his head, questioning every decision he had made, every word he had spoken. The guilt was unbearable, a constant weight on his chest that made it hard to breathe. If only he had been more careful, if only he hadn't let his temper get the best of him, Neha might still be alive. His family watched helplessly as Rocky spiraled deeper into despair. They tried to reach out to him, to offer comfort, but he pushed them away. He couldn't face them, couldn't bear to see the pity in their eyes. They had warned him so many times about his temper, told him that it would get him into trouble one day. But he hadn't listened, and now Neha had paid the price. Rocky's mother, Sarita, was beside herself with worry. She had always been close to her son, had always understood him in a way that no one else did. But now, As she watched him withdraw further and further into himself, she felt powerless to help him. She saw the anger in his eyes, the way he flinched at even the smallest sign of affection. He was like a wounded animal, lashing out at anyone who came too close. One evening, Sarita found Rocky sitting in Neha's favorite spot in the park, the same place where they had spent so many happy hours together. He was staring blankly at the ground, his hands clenched into fists. The sight of him broke her heart. "Rocky," she said softly, sitting down beside him. "Please, talk to me." But Rocky didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on a point in the distance, his mind far away. "Son, I know you're hurting," Sarita continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "We all are. But shutting us out won't bring Neha back. She wouldn't want this for you." At the mention of Neha's name, Rocky's fists tightened, and for a moment, Sarita thought he might lash out. But instead, he remained silent, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck stood out in sharp relief. "Rocky, please," Sarita pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Let us help you. We can get through this together." Finally, Rocky turned to look at her, and Sarita's heart broke at the emptiness she saw in his eyes. It was as if the light had gone out of him, leaving behind nothing but darkness. "There's nothing left to get through, Ma," Rocky said, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "She's gone. And it's my fault." "No, it's not," Sarita said firmly, reaching out to take his hand. "You didn't do this. Anthony did. You can't blame yourself for his actions." But Rocky pulled his hand away, shaking his head. "I should have protected her. I should have walked away from that fight. But I didn't. And now she's dead because of me." Sarita knew there was nothing she could say to convince him otherwise. The guilt had taken root deep inside him, and it was tearing him apart from the inside out. She could see it in the way he carried himself, the way he flinched at every loud noise, as if expecting another blow to come at any moment. In the days that followed, Rocky's behavior became more and more erratic. He started drinking heavily, drowning his pain in alcohol. The once disciplined man who had prided himself on his physical strength and control was now a wreck, barely able to function. He stopped going to work, stopped caring about anything at all. Rocky's father, Ramesh, was at his wits' end. He had always been a man of few words, but he was deeply concerned for his son. He knew that Rocky was struggling, but he didn't know how to reach him. The more Ramesh tried to talk to Rocky, the more distant and hostile his son became. One evening, after a particularly bad day, Ramesh confronted Rocky. The tension in the house had been building for days, and it finally reached its breaking point. "Rocky," Ramesh said, standing in the doorway of his son's room. "You need to snap out of this. Sitting here, wallowing in your grief, isn't going to bring Neha back." Rocky, who had been sitting on the edge of his bed, looked up at his father with a mixture of anger and resentment. "You think I don't know that?" he spat, his voice slurred from the alcohol he had been drinking. "You think I don't know she's gone?" "I'm just trying to help you," Ramesh said, his tone firm. "But you're not letting anyone in. You're destroying yourself, and for what? Neha wouldn't want this for you. Don't you dare talk about what Neha would want." Rocky shouted, his temper flaring. He stood up, swaying slightly as he faced his father. "You didn't know her like I did. You didn't love her like I did." "Rocky, please," Sarita said, stepping between them, trying to defuse the situation. "This isn't helping." But Rocky was beyond reasoning. The grief, the guilt, the anger, it all came bubbling to the surface, and he couldn't hold it back any longer. "Why don't you all just leave me alone?" Rocky shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "I don't need your pity. I don't need any of this." Sarita reached out to comfort him, but Rocky pushed her away, his movements wild and erratic. "Just go," he screamed. "I don't want you here." Sarita stumbled back, tears streaming down her face. Ramesh caught her, holding her close as she sobbed into his chest. He looked at his son, his own heart breaking, but he knew there was nothing more they could do. That night, the family made the difficult decision to leave India. They couldn't bear to watch Rocky destroy himself any longer, and they hoped that by giving him some space, he might be able to find a way to heal on his own. Rocky's sister, Meera, tried to reason with him one last time before they left. "Please, Rocky," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Come with us. We can help you." But Rocky shook his head, his eyes glazed over with a mixture of pain and fury. "I'm staying here," he said flatly. "This is my mess to clean up." With heavy hearts, the family packed their bags and left for England, leaving Rocky behind in the home they had once shared. As the door closed behind them, Rocky felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of their expectations, their pity, was finally gone, but with it went the last remnants of his old life, leaving him alone with nothing but his grief and his rage. That night, as Rocky sat in the darkened living room, the reality of his situation hit him with full force. Neha was gone, his family was gone, and he had nothing left to lose. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long finally erupted, and Rocky let it consume him. He smashed the furniture, broke the windows, tore through the house like a tornado of fury and pain. By the time he was done, the once warm and welcoming home was in ruins, much like the man who had destroyed it. Rocky collapsed to the floor, exhausted and broken, tears streaming down his face. The anger had given him a temporary release, but now all that was left was the crushing weight of his grief. He had reached his breaking point, and there was no going back. Rocky knew that his life would never be the same again. The man he had once been was gone, and in his place was someone who had nothing left to lose. The only thing that remained was the burning desire for revenge. Anthony had taken everything from him, and Rocky would stop at nothing to make him pay. The days following Rocky's emotional breakdown were filled with an unbearable silence. The once lively household, which had echoed with laughter and conversations, now seemed hollow. The weight of Neha's death hung over them all, but it was Rocky's descent into isolation that truly broke the family's spirit. Sarita, Rocky's mother, spent hours in prayer, hoping for a miracle that would bring her son back to her. But with each passing day, it became clearer that Rocky was slipping further away. The anger that had always been a part of him had now consumed him entirely, leaving little room for anything else. Ramesh, Rocky's father, took to spending long hours outside the house, avoiding the oppressive atmosphere within. He visited old friends, made excuses to run errands, anything to avoid the reality that awaited him at home. He knew they were losing Rocky, and he felt powerless to stop it. One evening, after another tense and silent dinner, Ramesh called a family meeting. The atmosphere was somber as Sarita and Meera, Rocky's younger sister, sat down in the living room, both of them sensing that something was about to change. "We can't go on like this," Ramesh began, his voice heavy with resignation. "We've tried everything to reach Rocky, but he's not the same person anymore. We need to think about what's best for all of us, and that means making some difficult decisions." Sarita looked up at her husband, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You're talking about leaving, aren't you?" Ramesh nodded. "I've been in touch with my cousin in England. He's offered us a place to stay until we can get back on our feet. I think it might be best if we go, at least for a while. Maybe the distance will give Rocky some time to sort through his feelings. But we can't just leave him here, alone," Meera protested, her voice trembling. "He's not in his right mind, Papa. What if something happens to him?" Ramesh sighed, rubbing his temples as he searched for the right words. "I know it's hard, Meera. But we've tried everything we can to help him, and nothing is working. Staying here, in this environment, might only make things worse for all of us. Maybe being alone is what Rocky needs to come to terms with his grief." Sarita's heart ached at the thought of leaving her son behind. The bond between a mother and her child is a powerful one, and the idea of being separated from him during his time of need was almost too much to bear. But she also knew that Ramesh was right, something had to change. The tension in the house was unbearable, and it was affecting them all. "I don't like the idea of leaving him," Sarita said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I don't know what else we can do. He won't listen to us, won't let us in. Maybe some time apart will help him find his way back." Meera wiped away tears as she listened to her parents. She knew deep down that they were right, but it didn't make the decision any easier. Rocky was her big brother, the one who had always looked out for her, and the thought of leaving him behind felt like a betrayal. "Can't we convince him to come with us?" Meera asked, her voice small. "Maybe if we talk to him together, he'll agree to go." "We can try," Ramesh said, though there was little conviction in his voice. He had already spoken to Rocky about leaving, but his son had been adamant about staying behind. "But we have to be prepared for the possibility that he won't change his mind." Later that evening, the family gathered in Rocky's room. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the wall, as if he hadn't even noticed them enter. His once strong and confident posture was now slumped, defeated by the weight of his grief. "Rocky," Ramesh began, his tone gentle but firm. "We need to talk." Rocky didn't respond, his eyes still fixed on some distant point. It was as if he were in a trance, completely disconnected from the world around him. "We've decided to go to England," Ramesh continued. "We think it might be good for us all to have some distance, to start fresh somewhere new. We want you to come with us." Rocky's gaze finally shifted to his father, but there was no recognition in his eyes, only a deep, unrelenting pain. "I'm not going anywhere," he said flatly. "Please, Rocky," Sarita pleaded, her voice breaking. "We need you with us. We can't bear to leave you behind." "I said I'm not going," Rocky repeated, his tone more forceful this time. "This is my home. I'm not running away. But this place is only causing you more pain, Mira said, her voice trembling with emotion. Maybe a change of scenery will help you heal. Rocky's face twisted into a bitter smile. Heal? There's nothing that can heal this. Neha's gone, and nothing can change that. You all go ahead, start your new lives in England. But I'm staying here. Ramesh exchanged a pained look with Sarita. They had feared this response, but hearing it still cut deep. They knew they couldn't force Rocky to come with them, and in that moment, they realized that they were truly powerless to help him. If that's your decision, Ramesh said quietly, then we'll respect it. But know that we love you, Rocky, and we're only a phone call away. If you ever need us, for anything, we'll be there. Rocky didn't respond, his eyes once again drifting away, lost in his own world. The family stood there for a moment longer, hoping for some sign that he might reconsider, but it never came. The next few days were a blur of packing and preparations. The house, once filled with the warmth of family, now felt cold and empty. Sarita moved through the rooms in a daze, touching the walls and furniture as if trying to imprint the memories of their time here before they were gone forever. On the morning of their departure, Ramesh loaded the last of their bags into the car. Sarita lingered in the doorway, her heart heavy with the weight of leaving her son behind. Mira stood beside her, wiping away tears as she looked back at the house one last time. Rocky didn't come out to say goodbye. He stayed in his room, the door closed, shutting himself off from the finality of their departure. The silence in the house was deafening, a painful reminder of everything they were leaving behind. As the car pulled away from the house, Sarita couldn't help but glance back at the windows, hoping to catch one last glimpse of her son. But the curtains remained drawn, and the house stood still, as if frozen in time. The journey to the airport was a quiet one, each family member lost in their own thoughts. The decision to leave had been necessary, but it didn't make it any less painful. The uncertainty of what lay ahead weighed heavily on them all, but they knew that they couldn't stay any longer. As the plane took off, Sarita looked out the window at the shrinking landscape below. She prayed that one day, Rocky would find his way back to them, but for now, they had to let him go. Back in Mumbai, Rocky stood alone in the empty house. The silence was overwhelming, the echoes of his family's presence still lingering in the air. He knew he had driven them away, and a part of him regretted it. But the anger, the pain, and the guilt were too strong, too consuming to allow him to do anything else. For the first time in his life, Rocky was truly alone. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, but he knew there was no turning back. The family that had once been his anchor was now gone, and all that remained was the burning desire for revenge. As he looked around the empty room, Rocky made a silent vow to himself. He would find Anthony, and he would make him pay for what he had done. And if that meant sacrificing what was left of his humanity, then so be it. Rocky's path was set, and there was no going back. The days after his family's departure blurred into a haze of bitterness and grief for Rocky. The once lively home was now an empty shell, echoing with memories that haunted him at every turn. Neha's laughter, his mother's gentle reprimands, his father's stern advice, it all seemed so distant, yet so painfully close. The silence in the house was oppressive, amplifying the void left by their absence. Rocky's struggle to cope with the loss of Neha and the abandonment by his family weighed heavily on him. The grief twisted into something darker, something that festered in the pit of his stomach. His anger, once a fiery outburst in moments of passion, now simmered constantly beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. Every thought of Neha's tragic fate fueled the flames, and every reminder of his family's decision to leave him behind added to the growing inferno. His days became a monotonous routine of aimless wandering through the house, drinking to numb the pain, and lying awake at night, consumed by thoughts of revenge. The once vibrant man who had filled rooms with his presence was now a shadow of his former self, hollowed out by the weight of his emotions. Rocky's descent into self-destruction began gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. He stopped caring for himself, letting his appearance become as disheveled as the chaos within his mind. His once strong and muscular frame became gaunt as he neglected food, finding solace only in the bottle. Alcohol became his constant companion, the one thing that could dull the sharp edges of his pain, if only for a little while. The drinking soon spiraled out of control. What had started as a way to cope with the unbearable emotions quickly became a crutch, a way to escape the relentless torment of his thoughts. He would wake up in the middle of the day, the sun already high in the sky, with no memory of how he had spent the previous night. His days blended together in a fog of drunken stupor, with no clear beginning or end. Rocky's temper, once a fiery blaze that he could barely control, had now become a cold, simmering rage. He was prone to sudden outbursts, smashing objects in the house in fits of anger, only to collapse into a heap of despair moments later. The walls of the house bore the scars of his fury, holes punched into the plaster, shattered glass from broken windows, and furniture overturned in a rage. The destruction around him mirrored the chaos inside his mind. He found himself wandering the streets of Mumbai late at night, stumbling through alleys and back roads, searching for something, anything, that could fill the void left by Neha's death. But all he found was darkness, both in the city and within himself. The people who had once been his friends now avoided him, recognizing the danger in his wild eyes and unpredictable behavior. Rocky's encounters with others became increasingly volatile. A simple bump in the street, a careless word from a stranger, was enough to set him off. He would lash out, fists flying, leaving a trail of broken noses and bloodied knuckles in his wake. It wasn't about winning the fight, it was about the release, the temporary satisfaction of giving into the rage that consumed him, but each fight only left him feeling emptier, more disconnected from the world around him. The satisfaction was fleeting, and as soon as the adrenaline wore off, the pain returned, sharper than before. The more he fought, the more he realized that no amount of violence could ever bring Neha back or make up for the life he had lost. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. The walls closed in on him, suffocating him with memories of a happier time. He couldn't escape the guilt that gnawed at him, the feeling that he had failed Neha, failed his family, and failed himself. He would sit in the dark, bottle in hand, replaying the events in his mind over and over again, torturing himself with thoughts of what he could have done differently. The nights were the worst. Alone in the darkness, Rocky would lie in bed, staring up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His mind would race with thoughts of revenge, of finding Anthony and making him pay for what he had done. But even the thought of vengeance, which had once driven him, now felt hollow. What good was revenge if it couldn't bring Neha back? What was the point of living if everything he had ever cared about was gone? As the days turned into weeks, Rocky's spiral into self-destruction deepened. He stopped leaving the house altogether, shutting himself off from the world outside. The curtains remained drawn, blocking out the sunlight, and the air in the house became stale, heavy with the scent of alcohol and neglect. The man who had once been full of life and energy was now a broken shell, consumed by his own demons. Rocky's isolation took a toll on his mental state. He began to hear voices in the silence, whispers that seemed to come from the shadows, taunting him, accusing him. He would lash out at nothing, screaming at the phantoms in his mind, only to be met with more silence. The house had become a tomb, and he its only inhabitant, haunted by the ghosts of his past. In the rare moments of clarity, Rocky would realize the depths to which he had sunk. He would catch a glimpse of himself in the mirror, a haggard, unrecognizable figure staring back at him with hollow eyes, and feel a pang of shame. But those moments were fleeting, quickly swallowed up by the darkness that had taken hold of him. Rocky's descent into self-destruction seemed to have no bottom, no end. He was trapped in a cycle of anger, grief, and despair, with no way out. The world outside continued to turn, but for Rocky, time had stopped the day Neha died. His life, once full of promise, had become a wasteland of broken dreams and shattered hopes, and he was lost in the ashes. But deep within him, buried beneath the layers of pain and rage, there was a small, flickering ember of something else, something that had not yet been extinguished. It was the last remnants of the man he had once been, a man who had loved deeply, who had fought for what he believed in, and who had once had a reason to live. That ember was all that remained of Rocky's former self, and though it was small and fragile, it was still there, waiting for the chance to ignite once more. But for now, Rocky was alone in the ashes, a man broken by the weight of his own emotions, searching for a way to rise from the ruins of his life. The turning point for Rocky came one morning when he awoke, sprawled out on the cold floor of his empty house. The hangover from the previous night's drinking was more brutal than usual, but it wasn't the physical pain that jarred him. It was the realization that he had hit rock bottom, that if he didn't change something, he would be lost forever. He stared at the ceiling, the events of the last few months flashing through his mind. The loss, the rage, the self-destruction, it had all led to this moment. He was alive, but he wasn't living. Neha's death had left a gaping hole in his heart, but he knew deep down that she wouldn't have wanted him to waste away in misery. She had always believed in him, even when he struggled to believe in himself. With a heavy sigh, Rocky pulled himself off the floor. He hadn't taken a proper shower in days, and his reflection in the mirror confirmed what he already knew: he was a mess. But as he scrubbed away the dirt and the grime, it felt like he was also washing away some of the guilt and shame that had clung to him for so long. The hot water stung his skin, but it was a welcome pain, a reminder that he was still alive and still capable of feeling something other than despair. He dressed in clean clothes for the first time in weeks and ventured out of the house. The bright sunlight hurt his eyes, and the noise of the bustling city was almost overwhelming, but Rocky forced himself to keep going. He needed to breathe fresh air, to see people, to remind himself that there was a world beyond his grief. His first stop was the small temple on the corner of his street, a place he hadn't visited since Neha's death. The priest greeted him with a kind smile, but Rocky could see the concern in his eyes. Rocky offered a silent prayer, not for anything specific, but just to find some semblance of peace within himself. As he stood there, the incense swirling around him, he felt a small weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Rocky knew that rebuilding his life wouldn't be easy. He was still plagued by anger, still haunted by memories, but he was determined to try. He started with small steps, cleaning up his house, throwing away the empty bottles, and fixing the damage he had done in his moments of rage. It was cathartic, in a way, to restore order to the chaos he had created. The physical labor helped to clear his mind, giving him something tangible to focus on. As the days passed, Rocky began to venture further from home. He started going to the gym again, pushing his body to its limits as a way to channel his anger into something productive. The familiar burn of his muscles felt good, a reminder of his strength, both physical and mental. It wasn't just about rebuilding his body, it was about reclaiming a part of himself that he had lost. During one of his visits to the gym, Rocky had his first real encounter with someone outside his shattered world. A fellow gym-goer, a man named Rishi, struck up a conversation with him. Rishi was a few years older, with a calm demeanor that contrasted sharply with Rocky's intensity. He had noticed Rocky's dedication and was curious about what drove him. At first, Rocky was reluctant to open up, but there was something about Rishi's quiet understanding that put him at ease. They began to train together, and slowly, Rocky started to trust him. Rishi didn't push him to talk about his past, but his presence was a comforting reminder that Rocky didn't have to face his struggles alone. Through Rishi, Rocky was introduced to a group of people who were also trying to better themselves, each for their own reasons. They welcomed him into their fold without question, giving him a sense of belonging that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was strange at first, to be around others without the burden of his past weighing him down, but it was also liberating. The group often met at a local cafe after their workouts, sharing stories and offering support. It was during one of these gatherings that Rocky met Mira, a young woman who worked as a volunteer counselor at a community center. Mira had a bright smile and a warmth that was infectious. She noticed the scars on Rocky's knuckles and the haunted look in his eyes, but she didn't pry. Instead, she simply treated him like a friend, offering her own stories and laughter without expecting anything in return. Mira's presence was a challenge for Rocky. She reminded him of Neha in some ways, her kindness, her ability to see the good in others, but she was also different. Mira was strong in her own right, someone who had faced her own battles and come out the other side with a desire to help others. Her strength inspired Rocky, and for the first time since Neha's death, he found himself opening up to someone new. The more time Rocky spent with Mira, the more he began to see that life could still hold meaning, even after so much loss. She encouraged him to join her at the community center, where he could put his energy to good use. At first, Rocky was hesitant. What could he offer to anyone else when he was still struggling to find his own way? But Mira's gentle persistence won him over, and he soon found himself helping out with the center's youth programs. Working with the kids was a new challenge for Rocky. They were full of energy and questions, and their innocence was a stark contrast to the darkness that had consumed him for so long. But as he taught them self-defense and shared his own experiences, he realized that he was starting to heal. The kids looked up to him, not just as a mentor, but as someone who had faced adversity and was still standing. Rocky's journey to rebuild his life was far from over, but with each new encounter and challenge, he was beginning to find his way. The anger and grief were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but they no longer controlled him. Instead, they fueled his determination to keep moving forward, to create something new from the ashes of his old life. As the weeks turned into months, Rocky found himself looking ahead, rather than back. He still visited the temple regularly, still trained at the gym, and still spent time with his new friends. But he was also starting to dream again, to imagine a future where he wasn't defined by his past, but by the choices he made now. In the quiet moments, when he was alone with his thoughts, Rocky still missed Neha with a pain that was almost physical. But he knew that she would be proud of him, proud that he was finding a way to live again. And in that knowledge, he found a small measure of peace. Rocky's story was far from over, and he knew that there would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face them. He had been through the fire and emerged on the other side, scarred but stronger, with a new resolve to build a life worth living. Rocky had rebuilt his life from the ashes, but the fire of revenge still burned within him. The rage he had buried beneath layers of newfound calm and purpose simmered, threatening to erupt at any moment. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Neha's face, heard her laughter, and then the memory would shift, replaced by the sound of her final, desperate cries as Anthony took her life. The knowledge that her killer still walked free gnawed at Rocky's soul, making it impossible for him to find true peace. One night, as he sat alone in his small, dimly lit apartment, Rocky made a decision. He had tried to move on, to build a life that honored Neha's memory, but the need for justice, or perhaps just vengeance, was too strong to ignore. Anthony had taken everything from him, and Rocky couldn't rest until the scales were balanced. The first step in his quest was to reconnect with the shadows of his past. Rocky knew that the world he had once inhabited, the one filled with violence and crime, was the only place where he could find the answers he needed. It was a world he had tried to leave behind, but now he had no choice but to dive back into its depths. He started by visiting the old haunts, bars, back alleys, and underground fight clubs where he had once been a regular. The people there recognized him, some with respect, others with fear. Rocky had made a name for himself as a fighter, and though he had been absent for some time, his reputation had not been forgotten. It didn't take long for word to spread that Rocky was back, and he was looking for someone. The whispers reached the ears of those who knew Anthony, and soon Rocky found himself being approached by figures from the underworld, each offering information in exchange for favors, money, or just the chance to settle old scores. One night, after a particularly brutal fight in an underground ring, a man approached Rocky. He was thin, with shifty eyes and a nervous twitch, but there was something about him that suggested he knew more than the others. "You're looking for Anthony, right?" the man asked, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. Rocky wiped the sweat and blood from his face, nodding curtly. "Do you know where he is?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "I know someone who can help you find him. But it's gonna cost you." Rocky's eyes narrowed. "How much?" "Not money," the man said quickly. "It's information. I've got some people after me, and I need to disappear. You get me out of the city, and I'll take you to him." Rocky considered the offer. He had the means to help this man, but it would take time that he wasn't sure he could afford to waste. But if this was the only way to get to Anthony, then so be it. "Fine," Rocky agreed. "But if you're lying to me, you won't make it out of the city alive." The man swallowed hard but nodded. "I'm not lying. Meet me tomorrow night at the docks. I'll have what you need." The next evening, Rocky arrived at the docks as planned. The air was thick with fog, and the sound of waves crashing against the pier filled the silence. The man was there, pacing nervously near a rusted cargo container. He looked up as Rocky approached, visibly relieved. "I've got the location," he said, handing Rocky a crumpled piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. "He's been hiding out in a safe house on the outskirts of the city. It's heavily guarded, so you'll need to be careful." Rocky took the paper, his jaw clenched with determination. "And your end of the deal?" "There's a boat waiting for me on the other side of the docks," the man said, pointing toward the darkened shore. "It'll take me to a safe place, far away from here." Rocky nodded. "Go. And don't ever let me see you again." The man didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran toward the waiting boat, disappearing into the mist. Rocky watched him go, then looked down at the address in his hand. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The safe house was located in a secluded area, surrounded by dense forest. Rocky approached it cautiously, using the cover of night to his advantage. As he got closer, he could see the guards patrolling the perimeter, armed and alert. Anthony wasn't taking any chances, but neither was Rocky. Rocky moved silently through the trees, taking out the guards one by one with precision and efficiency. Years of training and experience had honed his skills, and he knew how to strike without making a sound. Within minutes, the guards were down, and Rocky stood at the entrance of the safe house. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, his senses on high alert. The interior was dimly lit, with sparse furniture and an eerie silence that set Rocky's nerves on edge. He moved through the rooms, searching for any sign of Anthony. Finally, he found him. Anthony was sitting in a large armchair in what appeared to be a study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as Rocky entered, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, well, well," Anthony drawled, setting his glass down on the table beside him. "If it isn't the man of the hour. I've been expecting you." Rocky's fists clenched at his sides, his anger boiling over. "You took everything from me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And now I'm here to take it back." Anthony stood, unruffled by the threat. "You really think killing me will bring her back? You're more of a fool than I thought." Rocky's vision blurred with rage as he lunged at Anthony, the years of pain and grief fueling his every move. The fight that followed was brutal, a clash of fists and fury that echoed through the empty house. Anthony was strong, but Rocky's determination was stronger. In the end, it was Rocky who stood victorious, breathing heavily as Anthony lay at his feet, defeated and broken. But as he looked down at the man who had caused him so much suffering, Rocky didn't feel the satisfaction he had expected. Instead, he felt a deep, hollow emptiness. Vengeance had been his goal, but it hadn't brought him the peace he craved. Rocky turned and walked away, leaving Anthony behind. The search for redemption was far from over, and he knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult. But as he stepped out into the cool night air, Rocky made a silent promise to himself. He would find a way to heal, to truly honor Neha's memory. And in doing so, he would finally find the redemption he sought. The fight with Anthony had ended, but the battle within Rocky had only just begun. As he walked away from the wreckage of the safe house, his thoughts were a chaotic swirl of emotions. He had avenged Neha's death, but the satisfaction he had imagined was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was only a hollow emptiness, a void that even vengeance could not fill. Rocky wandered the streets aimlessly, the cool night air doing little to soothe the turmoil in his soul. He replayed the fight in his mind, Anthony's mocking words echoing in his ears. Was it true? Had he truly been a fool to think that killing Anthony would bring him peace? As the hours passed, Rocky found himself standing in front of a small, run-down chapel. Its doors were open, and a faint light flickered from within. Drawn by something he couldn't quite explain, Rocky stepped inside. The interior of the chapel was simple, with wooden pews and stained glass windows depicting scenes of forgiveness and redemption. An elderly priest was lighting candles at the altar, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked up as Rocky entered, his eyes filled with a gentle understanding. "What brings you here, my son?" the priest asked, his voice soft and kind. Rocky hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He had never been a religious man, and the idea of seeking solace in a place like this felt foreign to him. But something about the priest's demeanor put him at ease, and before he knew it, the words began to spill out. "I thought killing him would make me feel better," Rocky confessed, his voice hoarse. "But it didn't. It just made everything worse." The priest nodded slowly, as if he had heard this confession many times before. "Revenge is a powerful motivator, but it rarely brings the peace we seek. It is a path that leads only to more pain and suffering." Rocky lowered his head, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his guilt. "Then what am I supposed to do? How do I move on from this?" The priest approached him, placing a hand on Rocky's shoulder. "Forgiveness, my son. It is not an easy path, but it is the only one that can truly set you free." "Forgiveness?" Rocky repeated, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "How can I forgive a man like Anthony? He took everything from me." "Forgiveness is not about absolving the other person of their sins," the priest explained. "It is about freeing yourself from the chains of hatred and anger that bind you. It is about finding peace within your own heart, so that you may live your life without the burden of vengeance." Rocky closed his eyes, trying to absorb the priest's words. The idea of forgiving Anthony felt impossible, almost absurd. But as he stood there in the quiet chapel, he began to realize that the priest was right. Holding on to his anger had only brought him more pain, and it had consumed him to the point where he no longer recognized the man he had become. The priest guided Rocky to a pew, and together they sat in silence for a long time. Rocky's mind wandered back to Neha, to the life they had shared and the dreams they had once had. He thought about how she would have wanted him to live, not as a man consumed by revenge, but as someone who could find happiness and peace in the world. For the first time in a long while, Rocky allowed himself to feel something other than anger. He felt the deep sorrow of his loss, the grief that he had tried so hard to bury beneath his rage. And as the tears began to flow, he realized that this was the first step on the path to healing. "I don't know if I can forgive him," Rocky admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "It takes time," the priest said gently. "Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. But by choosing to walk that path, you open yourself up to the possibility of true redemption." Rocky stayed in the chapel until the early hours of the morning, lost in thought. When he finally rose to leave, the priest gave him a small, worn book, a collection of prayers and reflections on forgiveness. Rocky accepted it with a nod of gratitude, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult, but determined to take the first step. As he walked out into the dawn light, Rocky felt a sense of calm that he hadn't known in years. The weight of vengeance had begun to lift, replaced by a glimmer of hope. He knew that the path of forgiveness would not be easy, but it was a path he was now willing to walk, and so, Rocky began his journey toward personal redemption. He sought out the people he had wronged in his quest for revenge, offering apologies and making amends where he could. He devoted himself to helping others, channeling his energy into acts of kindness and compassion. Each day was a struggle, but with each step, the burden of his past grew lighter. Rocky's quest for redemption was far from over, but he had finally found a purpose beyond vengeance. He had found the courage to forgive, not just Anthony, but himself. And in doing so, he had taken the first steps toward healing his broken heart and finding the peace that had eluded him for so long. The weeks passed slowly for Rocky, each day blending into the next as he continued his journey of self-discovery and healing. The streets of the city, once familiar and filled with shadows, were now seen through a new lens. Rocky walked with a purpose, striving to make amends and find solace in acts of kindness. His days were filled with volunteering at local shelters, participating in community cleanups, and slowly rebuilding connections he had lost in his quest for revenge. One crisp autumn afternoon, Rocky was helping at a community center, organizing donations for a charity drive. The small, vibrant center buzzed with activity as volunteers worked tirelessly to prepare for an upcoming fundraiser. As he sorted through boxes of clothing and toys, Rocky's thoughts wandered to how different his life had become. The once fiery and destructive force within him was now being channeled into something positive. In the midst of this routine, a young woman entered the center with an air of quiet determination. She had a friendly face, framed by wavy auburn hair, and her eyes sparkled with a sense of purpose. Her name was Maya, and she was the coordinator for the center's outreach programs. "Hi there." Maya greeted Rocky with a warm smile. "I'm Maya. I haven't seen you here before. Are you new to the team?" Rocky looked up from the pile of clothes, meeting her gaze. "Yeah, I've been helping out for a few weeks now. Just trying to do something good." Maya's smile widened. "That's wonderful. We always need more helping hands. How are you finding it so far?" "It's different from what I'm used to," Rocky admitted. "But it feels right. I'm just trying to make a change, for myself and for others." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "We all have our reasons for being here. Sometimes, it's the small changes that make the biggest impact. You never know how much your presence can mean to someone." Rocky appreciated her words, though he wasn't entirely sure how they applied to him. He was still grappling with his own inner conflicts, but Maya's optimism was a refreshing change. They continued to chat as they worked, and Rocky found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone else. A few days later, Rocky encountered Maya again at a community event organized by the center. It was a lively gathering with music, food stalls, and activities for children. Rocky had been tasked with helping set up the event, and Maya was in charge of coordinating volunteers and ensuring everything ran smoothly. As the event progressed, Rocky noticed a young boy sitting alone on the sidelines, looking forlorn. His heart ached at the sight, and he felt a pang of empathy. Without thinking, he approached the boy and struck up a conversation. "Hey there," Rocky said, kneeling down to the boy's level. "You look like you could use a friend." The boy looked up, his eyes wary but curious. "I'm just waiting for my mom. She's busy with the volunteers." Rocky nodded, sitting beside him. "Well, while we wait, how about we play a game? I'm pretty good at these carnival games." The boy's face lit up with a smile. "Really? I'd like that." Rocky spent the next hour playing games with the boy, winning him a few prizes and making him laugh. Maya watched from a distance, a soft smile on her face as she saw Rocky's genuine connection with the child. After the boy's mother arrived and expressed her gratitude, Rocky returned to Maya, who greeted him with an appreciative nod. "You have a real gift, you know," Maya said. "The way you connect with people is special. It's clear that you're making a difference." Rocky shrugged, a little embarrassed but grateful. "I'm just trying to do what I can. It's not always easy, but moments like this make it worth it." Maya's eyes sparkled with something akin to admiration. "You know, I have a friend who runs a mentorship program for at-risk youth. They're always looking for people who have experienced struggles and come out the other side. Maybe you'd be interested in getting involved." The suggestion caught Rocky off guard. He had never considered mentoring as a way to give back, but the idea intrigued him. He was still on his journey of self-discovery, and the thought of using his experiences to help others seemed like a meaningful way to channel his energy. "I'll think about it," Rocky said, nodding slowly. "Thank you for the opportunity." As the event wound down, Rocky and Maya continued to talk, exchanging stories and ideas. Maya's enthusiasm and kindness were infectious, and Rocky felt a renewed sense of hope. Meeting her and getting involved with the community center had opened new doors for him, offering him a glimpse of a brighter future. Rocky left the event with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. Maya had introduced him to the possibility of new beginnings, and he was eager to explore this new path. As he walked home, he felt a strange but welcome lightness in his step. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Rocky felt that he was moving in the right direction. The chance encounter with Maya had given him more than just a new opportunity. It had rekindled his belief in the power of change and the potential for redemption. With a renewed sense of hope, Rocky looked forward to the next chapter of his life, ready to embrace the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. As Rocky continued his journey of redemption, the weight of his past choices and relationships lingered in the back of his mind. The days at the community center and the newfound purpose he had discovered with Maya provided a temporary escape, but the shadows of his previous life were never far behind. He knew that if he truly wanted to heal, he needed to confront the people he had hurt and mend the relationships that had been fractured by his past actions. Rocky's thoughts often drifted to his family, who had left for England after his breakdown. Their departure had been a significant blow, and although he understood their decision, the absence of their support and presence had left a void in his life. He had not spoken to them since they left, and the silence between them was deafening. One evening, after a long day of volunteering, Rocky sat down to draft a letter to his family. The words flowed with difficulty, each sentence a testament to his struggle to articulate his regrets and hopes for reconciliation. He wrote about his transformation, the steps he had taken to change, and how much he missed them. The letter was both an apology and an invitation, an attempt to bridge the gap that had formed between them. As he sealed the letter and addressed it to his family's new address in England, Rocky felt a mix of hope and anxiety. He was unsure how they would react to his outreach, but he knew that he had to try. It was a crucial step in his path to forgiveness, both for himself and for them. Days turned into weeks, and Rocky tried to remain patient as he waited for a response. During this time, he continued his work with the community center, dedicating himself to helping others in the hope that it would also help him find peace. Then, one morning, a letter arrived for Rocky. The envelope was from England, and his heart raced as he tore it open. Inside was a letter from his mother, written in her familiar, loving handwriting. "Dear Rocky, we received your letter, and I can't tell you how much it meant to us. It was a relief to hear from you and to know that you are taking steps towards healing. Your father and I have talked a lot about you, and we've missed you more than words can express. The transition to England has been challenging, but we are adjusting. Your father is working on settling into his new job, and I've been volunteering at a local charity. It's been a way to stay busy and find purpose, much like you have described in your letter. We are proud of the changes you are making, and we want to support you in any way we can. It's not easy to rebuild relationships, especially after everything that happened, but we are willing to try. We would like to invite you to visit us here in England when you feel ready. We believe that spending time together could be a healing experience for all of us. Please take care of yourself and know that you are always in our hearts. We look forward to hearing from you soon. With love, Mom and Dad." Rocky read the letter several times, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. His family was open to reconciliation, but he knew that rebuilding trust would take time and effort. The invitation to visit them in England was both a comfort and a challenge. He needed to confront his past, make amends, and face the consequences of his previous actions. With renewed determination, Rocky began to plan his visit. He knew that the journey would be emotionally taxing, but he was prepared to face it head-on. The prospect of reconnecting with his family and confronting his past filled him with a sense of purpose. In preparation for his trip, Rocky spent time reflecting on his past decisions and their impact on those around him. He reached out to old friends and acquaintances, seeking forgiveness and offering his own in return. It was a humbling process, but one that was essential to his growth. Finally, the day arrived for Rocky to board the flight to England. As he stood at the airport, suitcase in hand, he felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The journey ahead was both a literal and metaphorical one, representing his quest to mend the broken pieces of his life. Upon arriving in England, Rocky was greeted by his family at the airport. The reunion was emotional, filled with tears and heartfelt embraces. As they drove to their home, Rocky took in the unfamiliar sights and sounds of his new surroundings, feeling a sense of both nostalgia and anticipation. Over the next few weeks, Rocky spent time reconnecting with his family and adjusting to his new environment. They shared stories, memories, and moments of vulnerability as they worked through their unresolved issues. It was a gradual process, but each day brought them closer to understanding and forgiveness. Rocky's efforts to reconcile with his family were met with both challenges and rewards. The journey was far from over, but the steps he had taken toward healing were significant. He had begun to mend the relationships that had been strained by his past actions and was slowly rebuilding the trust that had been lost. As he looked out over the English countryside, Rocky felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The path to redemption was still ongoing, but he was no longer walking it alone. With the support of his family and the newfound strength he had discovered within himself, Rocky was ready to face the future with hope and determination. The sky was overcast, casting a grey pall over the city of London. Rocky's footsteps echoed through the empty streets as he made his way to the address he had been given. The time had finally come for his long-awaited confrontation with Anthony, and the weight of the moment pressed heavily on his shoulders. After months of reflection and rebuilding, he was about to face the man who had caused him so much pain. Rocky had tracked Anthony down through a combination of old contacts and investigative work. It had taken him several weeks of careful planning to locate Anthony's new hideout, a seemingly innocuous warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building was nondescript, blending in with the surrounding industrial landscape, but Rocky knew it was the place where their paths would intersect once more. As Rocky approached the warehouse, he couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since his last encounter with Anthony. The anger that had once fueled him was now tempered by a newfound sense of clarity and purpose. He had spent months working on himself, seeking forgiveness and making amends, and he hoped that this final confrontation would mark the end of his journey. The entrance to the warehouse was dark and foreboding, the heavy steel door seemingly untouched by time. Rocky took a deep breath and pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit interior. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of oil. As his eyes adjusted to the low light, he saw Anthony standing in the center of the room, surrounded by crates and machinery. Anthony looked up, his face breaking into a cruel smile when he saw Rocky. "Well, if it isn't the prodigal son. Did you come all this way just to die?" Rocky's heart raced, but he kept his composure. "I'm here for closure, Anthony. This ends tonight." Anthony's smile widened, and he took a step toward Rocky. "Closure? Is that what you're calling it? You should have stayed out of my way, Rocky. Now you'll pay the price." The tension in the room was palpable as the two men faced off. Rocky's fists were clenched at his sides, and he felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment he had been dreading and anticipating. He needed to confront Anthony not just for revenge, but to finally put the past to rest. Without warning, Anthony lunged at Rocky, his movements quick and aggressive. The two men engaged in a brutal fight, each landing powerful blows as they exchanged attacks. Rocky's training and newfound self-control allowed him to hold his own, but Anthony's sheer ferocity and ruthlessness made the battle fierce. The fight was intense, the sound of their punches and grunts echoing through the warehouse. Rocky's mind was focused, his movements precise and calculated. He knew that he needed to end this confrontation decisively, not just for his own sake, but to ensure that Anthony could no longer harm anyone else. As the fight raged on, Rocky managed to gain the upper hand. He blocked one of Anthony's punches and countered with a series of swift strikes, pushing Anthony back against a stack of crates. The two men were exhausted, their faces bruised and bloodied, but Rocky's determination gave him the strength to keep going. Finally, with a final, powerful punch, Rocky sent Anthony crashing to the ground. The once fearsome criminal lay sprawled on the floor, unable to continue the fight. Rocky stood over him, breathing heavily, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from his system. Anthony looked up at Rocky, his expression a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You think this changes anything? I'm just one man. There are others." Rocky's eyes were steely and resolute. "It's not about changing the world, Anthony. It's about finding peace with myself. This ends here." With that, Rocky turned and walked away, leaving Anthony behind. He felt a sense of finality and release, as if a great burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The confrontation had been necessary, but it was not the end of his journey. It was a step toward healing, both for himself and for those he had hurt. As Rocky stepped back into the cool evening air, he took a deep breath, savoring the sense of freedom that came with resolving his quest for revenge. The path had been long and arduous, but he had finally reached the end. Returning to his family's home, Rocky was greeted with warmth and support. They could see the change in him, the calm demeanor, the peace in his eyes. The reconciliation with his family and the final confrontation with Anthony had allowed him to close a chapter of his life and begin a new one. In the days that followed, Rocky continued to build on the progress he had made. He deepened his involvement with the community center, forging new connections and helping others who were struggling with their own battles. The journey toward redemption was ongoing, but Rocky felt confident and hopeful about the future. The final confrontation with Anthony had been a pivotal moment in Rocky's life. It marked the end of his quest for revenge and the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by forgiveness, self-discovery, and the promise of a brighter future. As he looked out over the city, Rocky felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that he had faced his demons and emerged stronger on the other side. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months as Rocky settled into his new life in England. The city of London, with its bustling streets and historic charm, had become his new home, offering both challenges and opportunities. For Rocky, this new beginning represented a chance to build a life defined by peace, purpose, and meaningful connections. Rocky's routine was now filled with activities that brought him a sense of fulfillment. His work at the community center had evolved into a key role, helping to manage outreach programs and mentoring young people who faced their own struggles. The job was more than just a means to fill his time. It was a testament to his commitment to making a positive impact on the world. One crisp autumn afternoon, Rocky walked through the community center's garden, enjoying the serene environment. The center had recently been expanded with a new outdoor space for events and relaxation. He paused to admire the garden's blooming flowers, a symbol of the growth and renewal he had experienced in his own life. As he worked, Rocky continued to rebuild relationships with those he had hurt in the past. His family, once distant and fractured, had become a source of support and encouragement. They often gathered for family dinners, sharing stories and laughter. The reconciliation process had been gradual, but it had strengthened their bond, allowing them to heal old wounds and forge a new, healthier dynamic. Rocky also made efforts to reconnect with old friends and acquaintances from India. He reached out to those he had lost touch with, seeking to mend relationships and offer his apologies. The responses were varied. Some were welcoming, while others were more reserved. But each conversation was a step toward making amends and finding closure. One evening, as Rocky prepared for another community event, he received a phone call from Maya. Her voice was cheerful, and there was a sense of excitement in her tone. "Hey, Rocky. I wanted to let you know that we're planning a big fundraiser next month, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. We're organizing a gala to raise funds for a new youth program, and I think your involvement would make a huge difference." Rocky's heart warmed at the invitation. "I'd be honored to help, Maya. Just let me know what I need to do." The gala was a resounding success, thanks in part to Rocky's efforts and the support of the community. The event was a celebration of progress and a testament to the positive changes that had taken place. As he stood in the crowd, surrounded by people whose lives he had touched, Rocky felt a deep sense of accomplishment and contentment. In addition to his work with the community center, Rocky took time for personal reflection and growth. He continued to explore new hobbies and interests, finding joy in activities that allowed him to express himself creatively. Painting, gardening, and writing became outlets for his emotions and a way to channel his energy into productive endeavors. The lessons Rocky had learned from his past were deeply ingrained in his daily life. He approached challenges with patience and resilience, understanding that true growth required both effort and forgiveness. The anger and pain that had once consumed him had been replaced by a sense of calm and acceptance. One evening, as Rocky sat on the porch of his family's home, watching the sunset over the horizon, he reflected on how far he had come. The journey had been arduous, filled with moments of doubt and struggle, but it had also been filled with growth and transformation. Rocky's life was now defined by the lessons he had learned and the relationships he had rebuilt. He had discovered the value of forgiveness, the strength of community, and the importance of finding peace within himself. The past had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. He had taken control of his destiny and forged a new path forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the landscape, Rocky felt a profound sense of peace. The future was filled with possibilities, and he was ready to embrace them with open arms. The journey of moving forward was not without its challenges, but Rocky faced it with hope and determination, knowing that he had the strength to navigate whatever lay ahead. With a renewed sense of purpose and a heart full of gratitude, Rocky looked to the future with optimism. The lessons learned, the relationships rebuilt, and the peace found were all part of a new chapter in his life, one defined by growth, redemption, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The city of London had slowly become a canvas for Rocky's new life, each day adding a stroke to the evolving masterpiece of his journey. As he walked through the familiar streets of his neighborhood, the bustling city felt like a silent witness to his transformation. The turmoil of his past seemed distant now, a distant storm that had passed, leaving behind clearer skies. Rocky stood at the edge of a tranquil park, where children played and couples strolled hand in hand. The simple joys of life that once felt out of reach now seemed like everyday blessings. The park, with its vibrant green lawns and colorful flower beds, mirrored the new chapters he was writing in his life, one of peace, purpose, and fulfillment. That he had come a long way since the days of anger and vengeance. The confrontation with Anthony had marked a turning point, but it was the ongoing journey of self-discovery and healing that had truly reshaped him. Rocky's days were now filled with meaningful work, heartfelt connections, and a deep sense of gratitude for the second chance he had been given. His relationship with his family had grown stronger, and the time spent with them had been invaluable. The dinners, conversations, and shared moments of joy had rekindled a sense of belonging and love that had once seemed irretrievably lost. They continued to be a source of support and encouragement as Rocky navigated his path forward. The community center remained a cornerstone of Rocky's life. His work there had evolved beyond just a job. It was a testament to his commitment to giving back and helping others find their way. The programs he had helped develop had made a real difference in the lives of many, and the sense of purpose it provided was a source of immense satisfaction. Rocky's personal growth was evident in every aspect of his life. He had embraced new hobbies and interests, discovering passions he never knew he had. Painting, gardening, and writing had become outlets for his creativity and expression, offering him solace and joy. As he looked out over the city from the park, Rocky felt a profound sense of contentment. The challenges he had faced had shaped him into a stronger, wiser person. He had learned to embrace forgiveness, to seek redemption, and to find peace within himself. The journey had not been easy, but it had been transformative. The future stretched out before him, filled with possibilities and opportunities. Rocky knew that there would be challenges ahead, but he faced them with a renewed sense of hope and determination. The lessons he had learned from his past would guide him, and the support of his loved ones would be his anchor. With a deep breath, Rocky took one last look at the park, the city, and the horizon beyond. The path he had traveled had been long and arduous, but it had led him to a place of peace and fulfillment. The journey of moving forward was not about erasing the past, but about embracing the future with a heart full of hope. As he walked away from the park and toward his new beginning, Rocky carried with him the strength of his experiences and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The road ahead was his to shape, and he was ready to meet it with courage and optimism. The story of Rocky's life had come full circle, from the depths of despair to the heights of renewal. It was a testament to the power of redemption, the importance of forgiveness, and the endless potential for growth. The future was unwritten, but Rocky was ready to pen the next chapters with hope, resilience, and an open heart.